I never thought I would find myself in this position, standing alone in my kitchen, the scent of burnt toast filling the air, while my wife Anna was out there somewhere, laughing and flirting with another man. A man who was a celebrity chef, no less. The betrayal felt like a knife twisting in my gut, and I didn't know how to process the emotions swirling inside me. I had thought we were happy, that our marriage was solid. But the moment I learned of her infidelity, everything shattered. Anna and I had been together for nearly a decade. We met in college and our connection was instant. She was beautiful, with a laugh that could light up the darkest room. I had always admired her passion for cooking, which was one of the reasons I fell for her in the first place. She was ambitious, driven, and had dreams of one day opening her own restaurant. I supported her wholeheartedly, believing in her talent even when she doubted herself. But I guess I had been blind to the cracks forming in our relationship. The late nights at work, the sudden bursts of excitement when she talked about her culinary classes. I had chalked it all up to her pursuing her dreams, but now I realized those late nights were often spent with someone else. My mind raced with images of her wrapped in the arms of that chef, his hands expertly guiding her as they prepared dishes together. I could almost hear the sizzling pans, the clinking of glasses, and the murmurs of admiration that filled the air. When I first discovered the affair, it was like stepping into a nightmare. I had just returned home from a long day at work when I noticed a message pop up on Anna's phone. I hadn't meant to invade her privacy, but my curiosity got the better of me. The message was from a number I didn't recognize, but the name that followed made my heart drop: Chef Marco. The text was flirty, filled with inside jokes and sweet nothings that made my stomach churn. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of confusion and rage. I confronted Anna that night. I remember her face paling as I read the message aloud, the way her eyes widened with shock and guilt. She tried to deny it at first, but the truth spilled from her lips like poison. She had been seeing Marco for months, and the affair had escalated quickly. I felt like the ground had been pulled from beneath me, and I was left grasping at straws. Anger bubbled up inside me, hot and uncontrollable. I wanted to scream, to throw things, to make her feel the pain she had inflicted on me. But instead I was frozen, a deer caught in headlights. I didn't know what to say or do. I had trusted her, loved her, and now she had shattered that trust in the most brutal way possible. The betrayal was not just about her infidelity. It was the loss of the future I had envisioned with her. I had dreamed of a family, of growing old together, of sharing quiet evenings over dinner and laughter. Now, that dream felt like a cruel joke. As the days passed, I found myself trapped in a whirlwind of emotions. I was angry, hurt, and confused, but beneath it all, I felt a strange sense of determination beginning to take shape. I couldn't let this go unpunished. I wanted revenge. I wanted to make Marco pay for what he had done. He had taken my wife, and in doing so, he had taken my dignity. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I had the power to ruin him. He was a celebrity chef, adored by many, but what if I could bring him down? What if I could expose him for who he really was? The thought filled me with a dark sense of satisfaction. I began to forge a plan, a way to ensure that his next dish would be his worst nightmare. I knew I had to be careful. Revenge was a slippery slope, and I didn't want to lose myself in the process. But the thought of Marco's career collapsing under the weight of his own arrogance became my obsession. I would make him regret ever crossing paths with Anna, and in doing so, I would reclaim my own lost sense of self. The kitchen, once a space of warmth and comfort, now became a battleground for my emotions. I felt the heat rising within me, and I knew that I was ready to take the first step in my plan. To understand the depths of my anger and the lengths I was willing to go for revenge, it's crucial to know not just the betrayal but who I was before all of this. My name is David, and I've always been the kind of guy who played by the rules. I had a stable job in finance, a modest but comfortable home, and a beautiful wife who I thought was my partner in everything. But like a lot of people, I had my insecurities. I was never the life of the party, never the one who stood out in a crowd. Anna was the star, the vibrant one, and I always felt like I was living in her shadow. In college, I had watched her light up rooms, drawing attention and admiration like moths to a flame. I had admired her from afar before we started dating, and even after we became a couple, I often felt unworthy of her love. I was the steady hand while she was the wild heart, the one who kept her grounded while she chased her dreams. I thought that was enough. I thought that my quiet support would strengthen our bond. But as the years went by, I began to see the cracks. In that facade, Anna was ambitious, yes, but she was also restless. I could feel her yearning for something more, something beyond the confines of our life together. I tried to be the supportive husband, encouraging her to pursue her cooking classes and culinary competitions, but I had no idea that my encouragement would lead her straight into the arms of someone else. Someone who was not just a chef but a celebrity, a man who commanded attention and admiration in ways I couldn't. I remember how Anna would come home, her eyes sparkling with excitement after meeting Marco at one of her cooking events. She would share stories about his success, his charisma, and how he inspired her. I felt a strange mix of pride and jealousy as she spoke of him. I thought she was simply looking up to a mentor. I had no idea that admiration would morph into something far more intimate. As I sat there in the aftermath of discovery, I was overwhelmed by feelings of inadequacy. Had I not been enough for her? Had I failed to keep her interested and engaged? Those questions gnawed at me, fueling the fire of my desire for revenge. I wanted to turn the tables, to make Marco feel the same sense of loss and humiliation that I was experiencing. The more I thought about my plan, the clearer it became. I had to dig into Marco's life, find out what made him tick, what could bring him down. There was a certain thrill in the idea of infiltrating his world, of using the very tools he wielded to craft his success against him. I imagined myself as a shadow in his life, pulling strings from behind the scenes while he remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing just beyond his reach. I started with the basics. I knew that Marco was known for his extravagant restaurants, the kind that attracted food critics and influencers alike. His brand was built on perfection, flawless dishes, impeccable service, and a carefully curated image. I had to find a way to exploit that image and unravel it from the inside. I began researching everything I could about him. I followed his social media accounts, watched interviews, and read articles detailing his rise to fame. He was charming, articulate, and had a way of making people feel special. But beneath that polished exterior, I was determined to find flaws, flaws that could be exposed to the world. I learned that Marco had a penchant for certain ingredients, those that he claimed were the secret to his culinary genius. I also discovered that he had a few enemies, former employees who had left his kitchens under less than favorable circumstances. I knew that I could use that information to my advantage. If I could align myself with those disgruntled ex-employees, I could gather the evidence I needed to tarnish his reputation. At the same time, I had to keep my distance from Anna. As much as I wanted to confront her about the affair, I knew that would only cloud my judgment. I had to focus on my plan, on the revenge that would ultimately bring me peace. I started distancing myself emotionally, spending more nights at work or out with friends, even though my heart was heavy with betrayal. The more I pulled away from her, the more I felt the weight of my decision to take control of my own narrative. I reached out to a few of Marco's former colleagues, carefully crafting my approach so it wouldn't seem suspicious. I posed as a food blogger interested in writing a piece on the challenges of working in high-pressure kitchens. They were surprisingly open to sharing their experiences, and I listened intently, jotting down notes while masking my true intentions. Each conversation fueled my resolve, and I began to piece together a picture of Marco that was far less than flattering. The more I learned, the more I realized that I had the power to shape the narrative. I could expose him not just as a chef, but as a man who took advantage of those who worked for him, a man whose arrogance could lead to his downfall. I was not just going to ruin his career, I was going to make him feel the weight of his actions, the way he had made me feel. As I sat down to plan my next moves, I felt a mix of exhilaration and dread. I was stepping into a world of intrigue and deception, and I knew I had to be cautious. The stakes were high, and I had to be prepared for whatever consequences would follow. But that was the price I was willing to pay. I was no longer just a victim, I was becoming the architect of my own revenge. The day I discovered Anna's affair marked the beginning of a transformation within me. I was no longer the passive husband who supported his wife's dreams. I was evolving into a man driven by a singular purpose: revenge. The emotional turmoil I felt after learning about her betrayal was now channeled into a calculated plan to dismantle Marco's career. I had become a man on a mission, and every step I took felt like a step closer to reclaiming my dignity. The moment I had been waiting for arrived sooner than I expected. One night, while scrolling through social media, I stumbled upon a post announcing a charity event hosted by Marco at one of his renowned restaurants. The event was designed to showcase his culinary skills while raising funds for local charities. It was the perfect opportunity for me to make my move. I could blend in with the crowd, observe him up close, and gather more information that could be useful for my plan. I took a deep breath, my heart racing with anticipation and anxiety. I decided to buy a ticket, telling myself it was merely research. I spent the days leading up to the event meticulously planning my approach. I focused on what I would wear, how I would present myself, and the persona I would adopt. I wanted to be inconspicuous, yet memorable enough to blend into the background of the bustling restaurant. The night of the event arrived, and I found myself standing outside the restaurant, the lights shining brightly from within. I could hear the laughter and chatter of guests mingling, the clinking of glasses, and the tantalizing aromas wafting through the air. My stomach twisted with a mix of excitement and dread. As I entered, I was greeted by a sea of well-dressed patrons and the backdrop of elegance that Marco had carefully curated. I navigated through the crowd, my eyes scanning for Marco. I spotted him across the room, laughing and charming the guests with his charisma. He was in his element, the center of attention, and I felt a surge of anger rise within me. This man had taken my wife, and here he was basking in the adoration of others. I had to remind myself of my purpose and keep my emotions in check. I approached the bar, ordered a drink, and took a moment to observe the interactions around me. I noticed a group of former employees in the corner, their expressions a mixture of admiration and resentment as they talked about Marco. I gathered my courage and made my way over to them, introducing myself as a food enthusiast eager to hear their stories. The conversation flowed easily, and I listened intently as they recounted their experiences working under Marco. They shared tales of long hours, unreasonable demands, and the pressure to maintain perfection in every dish. It was clear that beneath the glitz and glamour of his celebrity status, there was a darker side to Marco's success. I felt a thrill of satisfaction as I began to piece together the narrative I could use to expose him. I made sure to engage with each of them, asking probing questions while maintaining an air of innocence. I learned about the high turnover rate in his kitchens, the whispers of mistreatment, and the countless aspiring chefs who had come and gone, disillusioned by the harsh realities of working for a celebrity. Each story added fuel to my fire, reinforcing my belief that I was on the right path. As the night progressed, I managed to catch Marco's eye. He was surrounded by admirers, but I could see the moment he recognized me from the crowd. I was just another face in the sea of people, but I could feel the tension in the air as he approached me with that signature grin, confident and charming. "Enjoying the evening?" he asked, his voice smooth like silk. "Absolutely," I replied, forcing a smile. "It's quite an impressive turnout. The food must be incredible." "Thank you. We've worked hard to create something special," he said, his pride evident. "I hope you're ready for some unforgettable dishes." I nodded, suppressing the urge to reveal my true feelings. Instead, I played the part of a fascinated admirer, asking him about his culinary inspirations and his journey to success. He spoke passionately, and I couldn't help but notice the way his ego inflated with every word. I took mental notes, aware that this facade was merely a mask for the revenge that was brewing beneath the surface. As the evening wound down, I made sure to exchange contact information with some of the former employees I had spoken to. I was building a network, a coalition of disgruntled individuals who had once served under Marco's demanding reign. They were my allies in this mission, and I felt a sense of purpose with each new connection I made. After the event, I returned home, my mind racing with the details I had gathered. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was stepping into a world of shadows and deception. The thrill of revenge was intoxicating, but I also felt a twinge of uncertainty. Was I becoming someone I didn't recognize? I pushed those thoughts aside, reminding myself that I was doing this for my own healing. Days turned into weeks, and I continued to gather information about Marco. I spent countless hours researching his business practices, digging into any scandals that could be exploited. I reached out to food critics who had been critical of his work in the past, hoping to unearth anything that could tarnish his reputation. Each piece of information I uncovered added another layer to my plan, and I felt a sense of power growing within me. I also began to document everything. I started a journal detailing my thoughts, emotions, and the steps I was taking. I wanted to create a record of my journey, both as a reminder of how far I had come and as a way to articulate the pain that had driven me to this point. It was cathartic, and I found solace in the words I poured onto the pages. But as I delved deeper into my plan for revenge, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that I was losing a part of myself. I had started this journey seeking justice, but I was beginning to realize that the line between justice and vengeance was growing increasingly blurred. In my quest to ruin Marco, I was also risking my own sense of morality. I had to remind myself why I was doing this, why I needed to see him fall. But the more I immersed myself in this dark world, the harder it became to remember the man I had been before Anna's betrayal. I knew I had to stay focused. I was on the brink of something big, and I couldn't afford to let my emotions cloud my judgment. The next phase of my plan was approaching, and I could feel the anticipation building within me. I was ready to take the next step in my journey, and I was prepared to do whatever it took to see it through. The days turned into a blur of planning and preparation. I had immersed myself in the world of Marco, watching him from the shadows, gathering intel and forging connections. I felt like a puppeteer pulling strings from behind the curtain, and the thrill of it all was intoxicating. But as I moved deeper into my scheme, I began to feel the weight of my actions pressing down on me. The line between right and wrong was becoming increasingly indistinct. With the charity event behind me, I knew it was time to escalate my plan. I had built a network of disgruntled former employees who were eager to share their experiences, and I had gathered enough dirt on Marco to start crafting a narrative that could tarnish his reputation. I decided to take a more aggressive approach, one that would ensure the world would see him for who he truly was. I reached out to a few of the food critics I had identified during my research. I crafted an anonymous email, carefully detailing the stories I had gathered from Marco's former staff. I painted a picture of a man who was not just a culinary genius but a tyrant in the kitchen, more focused on his ego than the people who worked for him. I included specific anecdotes about the long hours, the unreasonable demands, and the toxic environment he fostered. I hesitated for a moment before hitting send. Was I really prepared to unleash this information into the world? The thought of it sent a shiver down my spine, but I reminded myself of the pain and humiliation Anna had caused me. I was doing this for my own healing, to reclaim my sense of self. With a deep breath, I clicked the button, and the email was sent into the ether. The next few days were a mix of anxiety and anticipation. I waited for a response, for any sign that my plan was taking shape. I kept checking the food blogs and culinary news sites, eagerly looking for any mention of Marco's name. I needed to know that my words had struck a chord, that they were causing ripples in the carefully crafted image he had built. Then, it happened. A few days after sending the email, I stumbled upon an article titled "The Dark Side of Celebrity Chefs: When the Kitchen Becomes a War Zone." My heart raced as I read through the piece, which included quotes from several former employees who had shared their experiences working for Marco. It was everything I had hoped for: exposés on his management style, accounts of his temper, and comments about the toxic atmosphere in his kitchens. It was all coming together. Marco's carefully maintained reputation was beginning to crack, and I felt a rush of exhilaration. I knew I had to keep the momentum going. I reached out to more former employees, inviting them to share their stories and experiences with me. I wanted to gather as much information as possible to build a comprehensive case against him. One former sous chef, Jake, was particularly vocal about his time working for Marco. He agreed to meet with me at a coffee shop, and I could sense the bitterness in his voice as he recounted the long hours, the unrealistic expectations, and the way Marco belittled his staff. It was a cathartic experience for him, and I felt a strange sense of satisfaction knowing that I was helping him voice his frustrations. Over cups of coffee, Jake opened up about a particularly egregious incident that had occurred in the kitchen. Marco had berated a young line cook for a minor mistake, throwing a plate of food against the wall in a fit of rage. The cook had left in tears, and the whole kitchen had felt the impact of Marco's wrath. I knew this was the kind of story that could resonate with the public, the kind of damning evidence that could turn the tide against him. As I gathered more stories, I began to formulate a plan to take this public. I envisioned a series of articles that would expose Marco's true nature, turning the spotlight on his abusive management style. I wanted to ensure that everyone who had ever admired him would see him for what he really was, a man whose talent was overshadowed by his cruelty. But as I delved deeper into this world of revenge, I began to feel the weight of my actions. I was becoming consumed by the darkness I had unleashed. Each new story I gathered brought with it a mix of satisfaction and guilt. I was doing this to reclaim my dignity, to get back at the man who had taken my wife, but at what cost? The thrill of revenge was intoxicating, but it was also isolating. I found myself withdrawing from friends and family, consumed by my mission. One night, after a particularly long day of gathering information, I returned home to find Anna sitting on the couch, waiting for me. She looked up, her eyes filled with concern. "David, we need to talk," she said, her voice trembling slightly. I felt a rush of conflicting emotions, anger, sadness, and an overwhelming desire to confront her about her betrayal. But I knew I couldn't let my guard down. I had to stay focused on my plan. "What is it, Anna?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. "I know things have been tense between us lately, and I want to work on it. I miss you. I miss us," she said, her voice softening. "Can we talk about what happened? I want to explain." I felt a surge of anger at her words. How could she talk about working on our relationship when she had shattered it with her infidelity? "What's there to explain?" I said, my voice rising. "You cheated on me, Anna. You betrayed my trust." She looked taken aback, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I know, and I regret it every day, but I want to make amends. I want to fix this." I shook my head, feeling the walls I had built around myself hardening even further. "You can't just expect everything to go back to normal. You've changed everything between us." As she spoke, I could see the remorse in her eyes, but it was too late for apologies. My heart was hardened by the pain of betrayal, and I couldn't allow myself to be swayed by her pleas. I had a plan, and I needed to stay the course. "I need time, Anna," I said, my voice flat. "I can't do this right now." With that, I walked away, leaving her sitting there, the weight of our shattered relationship hanging in the air. I could feel the resolve within me hardening. I was no longer the man consumed by hurt. I was becoming the architect of revenge. As I lay in bed that night, I couldn't escape the thoughts racing through my mind. I was on a collision course with Marco, and I was ready to see it through to the end. The thrill of what I was about to do was exhilarating, but I also felt a creeping sense of dread. What would happen when I finally pulled the trigger on my plan? Would it bring me the closure I sought, or would it leave me feeling emptier than before? The answer was becoming clearer by the day. I had to see it through. There was no turning back now. The stage was set, and I was teetering on the edge of a precipice. I had gathered enough information to craft a narrative that could bring Marco crashing down, and I was ready to execute the final phase of my plan. My heart raced with anticipation, and a part of me reveled in the power I had gained through my meticulous preparation. But with that power came an unsettling awareness of what I was about to unleash. I had begun drafting an exposé, piecing together the stories and accounts I had collected from Marco's former employees. I structured it like a compelling article, interweaving their testimonies with my personal observations. I wanted it to read like a well-researched piece that would capture the attention of food critics and bloggers alike. I envisioned the headlines: "Behind the Apron, the truth about celebrity chef Marco," or "The dark side of culinary fame, exposing the tyrant in the kitchen." I spent countless nights hunched over my laptop, pouring every ounce of my energy into the writing. As I crafted each paragraph, I felt a sense of catharsis. I was finally taking control of my narrative, and with each word, I could feel the weight of Anna's betrayal lifting. This was no longer just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my identity, my self-worth. But as I delved deeper into the writing process, I began to grapple with the moral implications of my actions. Was I truly justified in ruining someone's life? I recalled the faces of the former employees who had shared their stories with me, their pain and disillusionment evident in their voices. I had promised them a voice, a chance to be heard, but in doing so, was I becoming the very thing I despised? I pushed those thoughts aside, focusing instead on the end goal. The night I finally finished the article, I felt a rush of exhilaration mixed with trepidation. It was time to share my creation with the world. I reached out to several food blogs and critics, pitching my article and providing them with the evidence I had gathered. I wanted to ensure that the narrative would spread like wildfire, igniting conversations about the darker side of culinary fame. The response was swift and overwhelming. Within days, my article was published across multiple platforms, each site echoing the sentiment of the others. Food lovers and critics alike were shocked by the revelations, and Marco's name quickly became synonymous with controversy. The fallout was immediate. Social media exploded with discussions, and his restaurants began to see a decline in reservations as patrons reevaluated their admiration for the chef. I watched from the sidelines, a mix of satisfaction and guilt churning within me. I had succeeded in my mission, but at what cost? I could see the impact of my actions rippling through the culinary community. Former employees began to come forward, sharing their own stories and experiences, and Marco's carefully constructed image began to crumble. As I reveled in the success of my plan, I received a message from one of the food critics who had published my article. They wanted to interview me for a follow-up piece to discuss my motivations and the process behind the exposé. I felt a pang of anxiety at the thought of stepping into the spotlight. I had been careful to remain anonymous, to hide behind the shadows of my revenge. But this was an opportunity to further amplify the message I had set out to share. After much deliberation, I agreed to the interview. I wanted to ensure that my narrative was heard, that the voices of those who had suffered under Marco's reign continued to resonate. The interview was scheduled for the following week, and as the date approached, I felt a mix of anticipation and dread. The day of the interview arrived, and I found myself sitting across from the journalist in a dimly lit cafe. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I recounted the events that had led me to expose Marco. I talked about Anna, the pain of betrayal, and the journey I had taken to reclaim my sense of self. My words flowed easily, fueled by the adrenaline of finally sharing my story. But as the conversation continued, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered in the back of my mind. The journalist was fascinated by my tale, and I could see the wheels turning in their head as they processed my motivations. I felt like the protagonist in a twisted narrative, the hero of my own story. But was I truly a hero, or had I become a villain in someone else? After the interview, I walked home, the weight of my actions settling heavily on my shoulders. I had achieved what I set out to do, but I also felt a sense of emptiness creeping in. I had spent so much time focused on revenge that I had neglected the emotional toll it had taken on me. I had lost sight of who I was in the process. That night, Anna approached me again. She sat down beside me on the couch, her expression earnest. "David, I know things have been difficult between us, but I want to talk about what happened," she said, her voice steady. I felt a surge of anger rise within me. How could she still want to discuss our relationship after everything? I had been so consumed. My plan for revenge that I had pushed her out of my mind. "What's there to talk about, Anna? You made your choice," I snapped, frustration spilling over. "I know I hurt you and I can't change that," she said, her eyes pleading. "But I want to understand how we got here. Can we at least try to work through it?" I stared at her, feeling the walls I had built around my heart harden even further. "You don't get to decide when we work through this. You broke my trust, Anna. You shattered everything we had." As I spoke, I could feel the anger bubbling to the surface, but beneath it lay a deep sense of hurt. I was torn between wanting to lash out and the lingering love I still felt for her, but I couldn't allow myself to be vulnerable. I had spent so much time focused on revenge that I had lost sight of the healing that needed to take place. "I need time," I said finally, my voice cold. "I can't do this right now." With that, I walked away, leaving her sitting there, the weight of our fractured relationship hanging heavily in the air. I was caught in the whirlwind of my emotions, struggling to reconcile the man I had become with the man I once was. Revenge had consumed me, but now I was left with the consequences of my actions. As I lay in bed that night, I couldn't escape the thoughts racing through my mind. I had achieved my goal, but I felt emptier than ever. The thrill of revenge had faded, leaving behind a hollow ache in my chest. I had to confront the reality of my situation. I was no longer just a victim. I had become an architect of destruction, and I had to face the consequences of my choices. The next day, I awoke with a renewed sense of purpose. I needed to confront Marco one last time. I had to see him face to face, to understand the impact of my actions, and to reclaim my own narrative. It was time to bring this chapter of my life to a close. I was ready to face the man who had unwittingly set me on this path of revenge. I had to know if the thrill of my actions had truly brought me peace, or if it had only deepened the chasm of my own discontent. The decision to confront Marco felt like a necessary step in reclaiming my life. I had crafted a narrative that had spiraled out of my control, and now I needed to face the man who had unwittingly become the catalyst for my transformation. I wanted to see the man behind the curtain, to understand the impact of my actions, and to gauge the true depth of his character. I had learned from my sources that Marco was scheduled to appear at a local food festival, where he would be showcasing his latest culinary creations. It was the perfect opportunity for me to confront him. As the day approached, I felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation. I had spent months plotting my revenge, but now I was stepping into unknown territory. I had to remind myself of my purpose, to reclaim my sense of self, and to confront the man who had caused me so much pain. The morning of the festival, I arrived early, blending in with the crowd of food enthusiasts and aspiring chefs. The atmosphere buzzed with excitement, the air filled with the aroma of spices and grilled meats. I navigated through the stalls, my heart racing as I scanned the area for Marco. I wanted to make sure I approached him at the right moment, when he was surrounded by admirers yet vulnerable enough to hear me out. Finally, I spotted him. He was standing at his booth, charming a group of guests who were eagerly sampling his latest dishes. He looked confident, the image of a culinary genius basking in the adoration of his fans. But beneath that polished exterior, I knew the truth. The facade was beginning to crack. As I approached, I felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it. I was about to confront the man who had taken my wife and in doing so had instigated my journey into darkness. I took a deep breath, reminding myself of the resolve that had fueled my mission. I needed to do this not just for Anna, but for myself. "Marco," I called out, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. He turned, his smile faltering for a moment as recognition washed over his face. The crowd around him parted slightly, their attention shifting to me. "David," he said, his tone laced with surprise. "What are you doing here?" "I wanted to talk," I replied, my voice firm. "Just you and me." The crowd seemed to sense the tension, and I could feel their eyes on us. Marco hesitated for a moment, glancing at his admirers before stepping away from the booth, a hint of wariness in his expression. "All right, let's talk," he said, leading me to a quieter corner of the festival. The moment we were out of earshot, I felt the weight of the confrontation settle over us. "You think you can just take what's mine and walk away without consequences?" I asked, my voice low but filled with intensity. He raised an eyebrow, his confidence wavering. "What are you talking about, David? I didn't take anything. Anna made her own choices." "Choices?" I shot back, anger bubbling to the surface. "You think it's just about choices? You manipulated her, used your status to seduce her. You think you can play with people's lives like they're just ingredients in your next dish." Marco's expression shifted from surprise to defensiveness. "You don't know the first thing about what happened. Between us, Anna was unhappy and we connected. It wasn't my intention to hurt you." "Unhappy?" I echoed, incredulous. "You think that gives you the right to invade my marriage? You're a coward hiding behind your fame while you ruin lives." He clenched his jaw, the tension between us palpable. "And what do you think you've accomplished with your little vendetta? You think ruining my reputation will fix your marriage?" I took a deep breath, the gravity of my actions weighing heavily on me. "I didn't just do this for revenge, Marco. I did it to reclaim my own sense of self. You took everything from me and I wanted you to feel the consequences." We stood there, the noise of the festival fading into the background as the reality of our confrontation settled around us. I could see the cracks in his facade, the realization dawning that his carefully constructed world was beginning to crumble. "Maybe we're both to blame," Marco said finally, his voice softer. "But what you've done isn't going to change anything. It's just going to create more pain." I felt a surge of conflicted emotions. I had spent so long focused on revenge that I hadn't fully considered the ramifications of my actions. "I just wanted you to know the impact you've had," I said, my voice steadier now. "I wanted to confront the man who took my wife and shattered my trust." As I spoke, I could see the walls around him begin to crack. "You think I wanted this?" he asked, his voice tinged with frustration. "I never wanted to hurt you. Anna came to me. I thought we had something real." "Real?" scoffed, the anger bubbling back to the surface. "It was never real. It was a selfish act, and now you're facing the consequences." Marco took a step closer, his eyes searching mine. "What do you want from me, David? Do you want an apology? Because I can't give you that. I never meant for any of this to happen." I felt a wave of conflicting emotions wash over me. "I don't know what I want," I admitted, the honesty of my words surprising even myself. "Maybe I wanted to see you squirm. Maybe I wanted to feel powerful for once." As I stood there, I realized that my quest for revenge had been a double-edged sword. It had given me a sense of control, but it had also consumed me. I had lost sight of the man I once was, the man who had loved Anna fiercely and had sought to build a life with her. "I need to find a way to move on," I said finally, my voice softer. "This can't be my life. I can't be defined by revenge." Marco nodded slowly, a flicker of understanding passing between us. "Then maybe it's time for both of us to let go. You've made your point, David, but don't lose yourself in this darkness." With those words, the tension between us began to dissipate, and I felt a sense of clarity wash over me. I had sought to destroy him, but in doing so, I had only succeeded in tearing apart parts of myself. The thrill of revenge had faded, leaving behind a hollow ache. As I walked away from Marco that day, I felt a sense of liberation. I had confronted the man who had caused me pain, but more importantly, I had confronted myself. I realized that, while I couldn't change the past, I could choose how to move forward. In the weeks that followed, I took steps to rebuild my life. I sought therapy to help process the emotions that had consumed me, and I began to reconnect with friends and family. I focused on healing, on rediscovering the man I had lost in the chaos of betrayal and revenge. Anna and I had difficult conversations, and while the road to rebuilding our relationship was long, I was determined to try. I had learned that revenge may have felt satisfying in the moment, but it was forgiveness and healing that would ultimately set me free. As I looked back on my journey, I couldn't deny that it had changed me. I had faced the darkness within myself and emerged into the light, determined to reclaim my life and my sense of self. I had lost a part of myself in the pursuit of revenge, but I was ready to embrace the future, one step at a time. The thrill of revenge had faded, but in its place, I found something far more valuable, the strength to forgive, to heal, and to move forward. And that was the greatest victory of all.